Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm going to be showing you a Star Wars related drawing. It's a commissioned drawing that I was working on, and this was done in graphite pencil because I haven't worked in graphite pencil in a while. It's a drawing of Anakin and Obi-Wan on Mustafar. It's a scene from the prequels. Anyway, let me say a few words about the materials and the composition, and then maybe we're going to talk about the drawing process a little bit more, and the subject of my drawing and things like that. Anyway, like I said, I haven't done anything in graphite in quite a while because I normally prefer charcoal, but this one is going to be done with Faber-Castell graphite pencils. And these are probably as good as graphite pencils can get. These are really good high quality graphite pencils. Graphite pencils have their advantages and disadvantages. I have a separate video on that topic, but I'm going to cover some of those things here. The paper that I'm working on is 200 GSM smooth drawing paper, about 12 times 17 inches in size. So this is a large drawing with a couple of slightly larger portraits, and it took quite a bit longer than my usual drawings, not only because of the sheer size but also because of the type of the medium that I'm using, because graphite is generally slower than charcoal. It's a little bit slower to work with. Now I started, as I'm doing the sketch, maybe I should probably say a few words about the composition. I'm going to show you the reference photos. I'm going to put them in the link in the description so that you can see what the original photo looks like. I decided to bunch these two characters together a little bit to bring Obi-Wan a little bit closer and to move him a little bit closer to the center. So I thought that the original composition was a little bit spread too far apart, so I decided to bunch things together a little bit so that I could get a better looking composition. So in addition to these graphite pencils, I also used some graphite powder. I created that graphite powder by sharpening one of my graphite sticks. So I used that so that I could cover some of the larger areas a little bit more quickly and a little bit more smoothly. Now I did work over it with a pencil, but the thing is that when you put down the graphite powder first, it allows for a slightly smoother blending and some smoother, nice gradients. And of course, for spreading that graphite powder, I used brushes. I use brushes wherever I can, but in some places I also used cotillions and things like that in those areas where I needed a little bit more precision. So let me say a few more words about graphite pencils. So these Faber-Castell graphite pencils are really high quality graphite pencils. I don't think that there are many brands that are better than these. They have a nice range of value. They're very easy to sharpen. They don't get scratchy in my experience. So really good graphite pencils, but obviously, like all graphite pencils, they have some disadvantages of their own. And the disadvantage of graphite is that it does have that graphite shine. Graphite as a material is a little bit reflective, and that's why some of the values here will not appear quite as they are in real life. That's one of the things that I don't like about graphite, and that's one of the reasons why I experimented with some other pencils and other types of media. But graphite pencils, on the other hand, have some advantages because they allow for such great precision and detail, and because they're so easy to sharpen, you can have them sharp most of the time, and you can really create some small details and some really nice looking fine textures that you can't really capture with some other types of pencils. So graphite pencil drawings, especially portraits, when you look at them in real life, they look super detailed and super realistic. I don't really think there is any other medium that can really achieve that effect, those wonderful textures like the graphite pencils can. But they are a little bit slower to work with, and there is that issue of the graphite shine. Now these are just regular classic Faber-Castell graphite pencils, but recently I learned that there are also Faber-Castell matte graphite pencils, meaning that they are not as reflective, and I'm working on obtaining those. I will probably have them within a month or so. I'm not really sure, but I'm trying to get them. It's not easy to get them where I am, but I really want to try those out, because if they are as good as these Faber-Castell regular graphite pencils, plus they don't have that graphite shine, those would really be great drawing tools that I could use, especially for portraits, but maybe for other things as well. So I'm looking forward to receiving those. And like I said, I've just found out about them like maybe a month ago or a couple of months ago. But in the meantime, I decided to play around with these regular Faber-Castell graphite pencils to see what I can do with them. And when things started to be a little bit slower than usual, I didn't get discouraged, because I sort of remembered what it was like when I used to draw only in graphite, and I used to draw only in graphite for a couple of years. And graphite pencils were my only drawing tools. But let me get back to the drawing process here, because I've already done a couple of important things here that I probably should talk about. So I did the background a little bit, because I need to make the background dark enough so these lighter hairs would show up against it. Contrast is important, and you can't create that contrast if you don't have enough value. So I first created a sufficient amount of value in the background, and then I started using a pencil eraser to draw these flyaway hairs and to make that left side of the hair a little bit lighter. I'm also using the pencil eraser to draw some highlights in the hair to make it look like some of these segments of hair are sitting on top of the other ones. And the pencil eraser that I'm using, by the way, is a Kohinoor pencil eraser. It's like a piece of soft rubber in a wood casing, so it can be sharpened and used like a pencil. It's very convenient, both for erasing and correcting, and for shading, and for drawing details and highlights and things like that. Now, one of the most difficult tasks here is drawing this hair. He has slightly curly, or rather it's more like wavy, really messy long hair, with a lot of these segments and strands of hair overlapping and flying each way. And the thing is that the key here is to be able to show that depth in that hair, so that I can make it look like some parts of that hair are in front of the others. And in order to be able to do that, I'm going to have to use a lot of this Kohinoor pencil eraser, because otherwise I won't be able to make these some of these segments of hair look uninterrupted, at least the ones that are sitting on top of the other ones. So how do you create that feeling of depth? Well, obviously those parts of the hair which are further away from the light source, which are kind of tucked in deeper or nearer the scalp, they're going to be darker, and those segments of hair which are on top, which are closer to the light source, they will be lighter. And the thing is just that you need to try to decide how complex you want to make it, because obviously when you're using reference photos, the the hair in the reference is going to appear always going to appear a lot more complex than on your drawing, unless of course you are doing a photorealistic drawing and you're willing to spend dozens of hours drawing a single portrait. But I'm not doing that here, and those are not the type of drawings that I do. But in order to make something that looks fairly realistic, you still need to invest a lot of time in order to kind of separate that whole mass of hair or bunch of hair into smaller segments, and to try to explain that shape and structure to the viewer. And this is a process that takes a while. And another challenge here, of course, is that even if I separate it into segments, it's still going to end up looking flat if I don't have a sufficient range of value. So another challenge here is using multiple grades of graphite pencils and knowing where to use which one, so that I can maximize that range of value, so that I can really achieve that feeling of depth. And you can see that as I'm making my progress with the left side of the hair, it's starting to look more and more three-dimensional, because I started adding in those darkest bits using my 8B and 6B graphite pencil. Because if you didn't use those, everything would look either too light or kind of too flat, and you don't want to do that. So here on this lower part of the hair, around the sides of the face and under the ear, the hair is a little bit darker because it's tucked in and further away from the light source. But at the top, obviously, it's going to be a little bit lighter. Now I should probably say a few words about my light source, because as you can see, that left side of the hair looks pretty light. It looks a lot lighter than the rest of the hair. So the light source is going to be coming from the left side, and you will see hopefully a very strong contrast between the light side and the shadow side. The shadow side is going to be the right side of the face and the right side of the hair, and I'm going to be using more of the softer graphite pencils on that side. So these bangs on the forehead are also a little bit difficult, and I'm going to need to try to define their shape as well. But at this point I decided to leave that for a while and move on to doing something else. I decided to work on the eye, because I guess I found that a little bit more interesting, to break the monotony of drawing all that hair. And I zoomed in a little bit more so that I can bring you closer, so that you can see some of the details, and I slowed the footage down a little bit. So I'm drawing the eye, the pupil, and then the iris, and obviously there's going to be a few of these smaller reflections in the eye, the catch lights. And in order for them to stand out, and in order for the eye to appear both round and kind of smooth and reflective, you have to work around those reflections, and you have to shade around them so that the lighter portions would really stand out. So again, contrast and range of value is extremely important, as it is with everything else when you're drawing. Of course, another thing that I need to worry about is the likeness of my characters. I don't have to make them look 100% the same as they were in the movie, but I just want to achieve a high degree of likeness. So some simplification and approximation here and there is fine, especially when it comes to the hair and some other details, but I mostly want to get the facial features to look like the actors who portrayed these two characters. And Anakin, or Anakin Skywalker, was portrayed by Hayden Christensen, if I'm not mistaken. And Obi-Wan by what was the other actor's name? I can't really remember. The British actor. Anyway, so like I said, the scene is from the final movie in the prequel trilogy, the Revenge of the Sith, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a commission drawings. I've done a ton of these Star Wars commissions. I'm not a huge Star Wars fan because, as you know, I'm mostly a fan of The Lord of the Rings, The Pirates of the Caribbean, but nonetheless I've done a lot of Star Wars related artwork. And I have to tell you honestly, I only liked the original trilogy. And I wasn't particularly impressed by the prequels. I know they have an interesting idea there. They're trying to describe the origin of that conflict, of how Anakin became Darth Vader. And I can see how that will be interesting to the Star Wars fans, but like I said, I thought that the movies were rather mediocre. And of course I haven't seen any of the sequels, some of these newer movies, whether it was because of the lack of time or simply because of a lack of interest. So it's mostly the original trilogy for me. But if you like the prequels, I have nothing against you. You want to see that part of the story as well. There were some interesting characters there and some interesting ideas. So this scene takes place at Mustafar, I think, and this is the final conflict between Anakin and Obi-Wan. And this is where Anakin's body will be crippled so that he will eventually become Vader. There are a couple of very difficult things here around the right eye that I need to draw. So some of these bangs are kind of dropping over one of his eyes and eyebrows, and I kind of need to work around those lighter areas, which is a little bit difficult considering the fact that I also need to worry about the overall shape of the eye and the eye socket, because I'm trying to achieve likeness as well. So I have to tell you, this was a pretty challenging drawing. And now I'm working on that right side of the hair, and as you can see I'm covering this with a softer 6B pencil, and I'm covering this rather carelessly. I know I should be working in a much more controlled and patient manner, but I don't really have the patience to do that with graphite pencils. This type of work would be much easier in charcoal, and obviously some parts of this drawing are much easier to pull in graphite than charcoal, but these larger areas where you need where you need to shade larger dark areas, when you need these transitions or gradients between the areas of darker value and lighter value, this is much more easily done in charcoal. So I'm not whining about the fact that I can't really do the same thing in graphite. I'm just telling you that these are some of the differences that you need to be aware of. This contrast in the light side and the shadow side is also going to be visible on the nose, on the face, all other parts of the body. So we need to stay consistent with the light source. But now, because this right side of the hair is fairly dark, I still need to find a way to make it a little more interesting and to break it into individual segments so that I can give that hair some depth and structure and shape as well. And a great blending tool with graphite, of course, is brush, especially a hard bristle brush, like a flat cropped tip bristle brush. That's one of the things I like to use, because that really blends graphite very thoroughly and pushes the graphite into those smaller white areas that you couldn't fill in using your pencil. And it also helps you because it allows you to spread the graphite without saturating the surface of the paper with too much of the material, which would make the surface of the paper a lot smoother and more shiny. So brushes actually help with the graphite shine to a certain degree, because they help you draw these darker areas, larger darker areas, without actually burnishing the paper too much and putting down too much of that smoother reflective material on top. So that's good. But I have to warn you, because the appearance of graphite depends largely on the angle of viewing, because I adjusted my lighting so that I can just see what I'm doing, but there is a bit of graphite shine, at least I'm seeing that on the top of the head. And so the appearance of the drawing on my footage, I'm afraid, is a little bit different than it is in real life, because some of these areas which are kind of grayish in the footage, they are actually much darker in real life. So that's one of the disadvantages of graphite, because it also makes it a little bit more difficult for you to show what the drawings actually look like in real life. I would have to experiment a little bit with the position of my lamps and to see which angle is the best, so that I can reduce or minimize that graphite shine. But I think you can still see most of the, not just the details, but the contrasts and the ranges of value. Anyway, I'm shading the nose. Like I said, the contrast between the light side and the shadow side is also visible on this part of the face, with the right side being quite a bit darker because it's in the shadow. Now, as for the grades that I'm using, because I haven't talked about that, I just merely mentioned the brand of the graphite pencils which I'm using. I'm using a number of different grades: HB, B, 2B, 4B, 6B, and 8B. So those are the ones that I used. As for the type of pencil stroke that I'm using, most of the time I didn't really worry too much about that, about laying down the strokes in a careful manner, because this is such a large drawing that I was kind of in a hurry to cover some parts of it a little bit more quickly. But normally when I'm shading the face, I will use a tapered stroke, which is kind of like a one-directional stroke where the mark tapers on both ends, and that's what allows you to make seamless transitions. But I will often go back and forth with my pencil, and I will sometimes even make circular motions and things like that. So whatever is needed to shade these large areas. Because this is a fairly large face. I've done very few portraits that were as large as this one. And like I said, in graphite, that's what makes it even slower. Now, a tricky thing about the shadow side of the face is that everything in the shadow side needs to be darker than the light side, but within the shadow side itself, you're going to have a range of value and some variation in value. So some parts of the face in the shadow side need to appear even darker, and some parts of that face, of that right side of the face, will need to appear lighter. and there's also always a little bit of reflected light coming from the other side, and there are other things that can be a little bit confusing. For my blending tools, as you've seen so far, I mostly use brushes, but I've also used tortillons a little bit here and there. Here you can see me adjusting the shape of some of the larger parts of the face, like the eyes, the lips, and I even did a little bit more work on the chin and the shape of the lower part of the face, because I felt that the chin and the jaw area was a little bit too massive. So some of these things are a little bit difficult to gauge even when you have a fairly precise sketch. And one of the main challenges, or one of the biggest challenges when you're drawing a large portrait, is getting the shading to look right, because it's so much harder to shade larger portraits. And some of the things that I like to use to help me make sure that I got it to look right is to zoom out of the reference photo and to see the placement of the larger areas of light and shadow. So you need to try to make sure that you have those larger relationships between lighter areas and shadow areas in place. And then you need to try to make sure that those larger areas of shadow are dark enough. So when you're looking at a large portrait, it can be a little bit difficult. So one of the things that you may need to do is to step away from your drawing every now and then, so that you can see whether as you're moving away from your drawing, you can start to see some distortions. And I think you'll be surprised, if you haven't tried this before, I think you'll be surprised how much different your portrait will look at a distance of, let's say, 10 feet than it does when you're looking at it from up close. Because when you move away slightly, you will be able to see some distortions, and you'll be able to see whether some of those areas of light and shadow are big enough or dark enough or light enough. And when you see those distortions and when you see those mistakes, you can correct them. And another thing that you can do, this is another tip, you can also try to look at your drawing in a mirror. That way you can see some of the asymmetry and some of the distortions that you may have created. Now, another interesting thing that I'm doing here with a pencil eraser is I'm actually taking away a bit of value in some parts of the face in order to achieve a better looking shape of the face and more likeness. So I'm basically using a pencil in the same way that a pencil eraser, in the same way that I would use a pencil, because when I use a pencil to do this finer shading, I'm usually using very short tapered strokes and cross hatching. But I can do the same thing with my pencil eraser. I just use the tapered stroke here and there to take away a bit of the value and to make some parts of the face a little bit lighter. And I do this gradually by using some of these lighter or rather smaller tapered strokes, and I make sure that I don't use much pressure while I'm doing that. Now, if you once you do that, if you feel like you've produced too much texture, you can always dab that a little bit with a brush and soften that a bit. And the same goes for when you're shading with a pencil. If you feel like during the shading process you've produced too much texture, you can always go over it a bit with a brush, and you can make the area a bit smoother. But you don't want to destroy all of your textures, because they make the drawing so much more interesting and so much more realistic. As I always say, these small random details create that illusion of detail, and they give you something to entertain the eye of the viewer, so that they can feel like they're looking at something that is almost photorealistic, even though it's not photorealistic and you only spent a few hours working on it. But as you can see, the shading of the right side of the face is almost complete, and I have a nice contrast between the right side and the left side. So now I'm moving on to these flyaway hairs on the right side. Just a whole bunch of these segments of hair and flyaway hairs. And first I'm kind of trying to define the overall shape, and then I'm just going in and covering all of the white spaces to make the hair a bit darker. Here again I'm going to make it a bit darker at the bottom, but obviously I still need a lot of work in order to cover all of this. And a Q-tip, of course. I've been using Q-tips. They're also pretty useful when blending with graphite, especially when you want to blend more smoothly and when you want to remove a lot of the texture. Here I did the outline of the other character, and I'm just gonna work a little bit more on the right shoulder, or his left, of Anakin. This is going to be pretty dark, and this part of the hair on the right also very dark. I'm going to do a lot of work here with an 8B. The trick to make the hair look more natural is not to try to draw every single hair, but to draw a sufficient number of them and then just use a blending tool on top of them. Probably the best idea is to use a brush. And here I'm using a bit more of the graphite powder to cover the background here. Now I'm going to lose a bit of contrast on the right side. The dark side of the Anakin's head would stand out even more against some lighter background, but I have to make the background a bit darker so that Obi-Wan would stand out. So I'm finishing this part around the shoulder, working mostly with a combination of 6B and 8B. And I don't worry too much about the texture because I can always smooth it out using a variety of blending tools. I didn't even record all of that drawing process because I can just go over it with a brush, and a stiff bristle brush will do a good job at removing a lot of that ugly texture. Moving on to drawing Obi-Wan. Just drawing some of the darker bits around the parting and the bangs and things like that. And now it's time to work a bit more on the facial features. This is where I have to be a bit more careful, which is why my head is butting in, and I'm moving in a little bit closer so that I can be sure that I'm putting everything in place. Both large portraits and smaller portraits are challenging in their own way, because with larger portraits you're kind of too close to this large drawing, and it's a good idea to step away so that you can see whether everything is in place. But with smaller portraits you have very little room for mistake, and you need a lot of precision. So we have a combination of two different challenges, two completely different challenges in one drawing. This scene, I believe, takes place before the lightsaber duel between two. which ends the way it ends because Obi had the higher ground apparently. My footage went a little bit blurry here, sorry about that, the camera went out of focus, but I'm working around the edges of Obi-Wan and making sure that I have a clean edge. I want a clean edge especially around the head and the left side of the face. Around the shoulders I can maybe make it a little bit less defined, but mostly a nice transition, nice clean transition between the light side of Obi-Wan's face and the body and the background. Again, I'm using the amount of value in the background to create contrast with the main character, which is what I did all the way on the left between the light side or the left side of Anakin's head and the background. And by the way, as for the background, I'm going to try to capture at least a little bit of that scene from the movie, because it's kind of like a volcano type of environment. So I'm going to try to incorporate some of these details. The robe is a little bit lighter than the shirt or whatever it is that he's wearing, and there's not much shading to be done here. It's just that the top part of the body, the top part of the shoulders is a lot lighter than the rest, or not a lot lighter because it's already of lighter color, but just a bit lighter. So if I feel like I need more contrast, I can just go back with an eraser and take away a bit of the value. I suppose I should remind you to subscribe if you haven't already, because a lot of the people who watch my videos aren't subscribers. So if you want to check out more of my content, or if you want to be notified when I upload new videos, you can subscribe and maybe click the notification icon. If you don't, it doesn't matter. If you want to browse through my videos, you can check out my other videos. I have lots of other stuff. I have other Star Wars drawings. I'm going to do a couple more in the future. I also have a lot of landscapes and portraits and wildlife. Depends on what you're interested in. Also, don't forget to give me a like and comment. That means a lot for my channel. And if you want to see longer videos with some real-time footage, you should check out my Patreon. I'm not going to be doing the full-length video for this one. This is going to be it, 40+ minute video. And I don't have all of the footage. I mean, I didn't record all of the drawing process, but I recorded most of it, and I just had to do most of it in time lapse for a YouTube video so that it wouldn't be too long. I think I'm making progress here with Obi-Wan's face and the beard. I'm just going to do a bit more work on the background, make that a little bit darker. Of course, some of the edges get a bit blurry. In the meantime, I can just go back and clean that up using a pencil eraser. I do use kneaded erasers also every now and then, but it's just that when it comes to these smaller details, I find the pencil eraser a lot more convenient. So here are some of the details of the environment that I decided to, of this setting that I decided to put in. I'm just going to put something that kind of looks like some, I don't know, mountains and a volcano in the background, and some of the variation in the terrain here and there. just so that I have something that kind of adds to the atmosphere a little bit. So I'm gonna have something like a volcano. So once again, because this is all in graphite, you can see how the appearance of my drawing is changing as I'm moving my hand, as I'm moving the paper slightly. That's because it's getting lighter or darker depending on the angle at which the light is falling on the surface of the paper. So the appearance of the drawing is a little bit different in real life. I like to believe that it's quite a bit better in real life because you can really see that range of value, and those darker bits are a lot darker than they appear here because of that graphite shine at the top. But I think it still looks okay. It looks good enough for this YouTube video. I'm just wrapping things up. I'm finishing some of these details, and I'm going to put my signature in the lower right corner. I try to adjust my lighting a little bit so that you can see a little bit better what it's supposed to look like. And this is the finished drawing. I also sprayed it with some fixative. The fixative reduces the graphite shine to a certain degree, by the way. That helps a little bit. But graphite was fun to work with. I haven't done that in a while. I want to thank you for watching, and I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye for now.